The porcelain cup shattered at the Mafia boss's feet. For one frozen heartbeat, no one breathed. Because the little girl hadn't spilled a drink, she had stopped a murder. Deep underground, Seoul's most exclusive casino hummed with quiet violence. Men in tailored suits smiled, drank, and decided who would live through the night. In a dim service kitchen, Bowman bowed her head. "Please, may I take the leftovers for my daughter?" Her desperation went unnoticed. Behind a cracked door, 7-year-old Haina watched the VIP table. She didn't see laughter. She read lips. Measured pauses. The smallest betrayals hiding behind raised glasses. One sentence cut through her like ice. "Iti." Now. At the center of the table sat a man everyone feared. Calm, powerful, untouchable. The Mafia boss. Haina moved before fear could stop her. Before the story begins, take a second to like and subscribe. You won't want to miss what comes next. The heavy, ornate door to the VIP lounge was slightly ajar. Just enough for a sliver of light to cut across Haina's wide, observant eyes. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of expensive tobacco and the sharp, clinical smell of the clean-up solution the lieutenants had whispered about. Her mother, Bowman, was still in the kitchen. Her voice a low, trembling hum as she pleaded with the manager for the scraps of a Wagyu steak. But Haina wasn't looking at the food. She was looking at the tea. At the center of the room sat Hajuan. He was a man of sharp angles and silent gravity, his presence filling the space like a physical weight. Surrounding him were 4 men in impeccable charcoal suits, his most trusted advisors, leaning in with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Haina watched their lips move in a silent, deadly rhythm. The reaction is instantaneous. One lieutenant's lips formed the words. "He won't even have time to stand." Hajuan reached for the delicate celadone teacup, his long fingers wrapping around the porcelain. The steam rose in a gentle, treacherous curl. Haina didn't think about the rules. She didn't think about her mother's warning to remain invisible, or the fact that they were one mistake away from the freezing streets of Seoul. She only saw the predator becoming the prey. Before the manager could answer Bowman's plea, Haina lunged. She darted through the gap in the door. A small blurred streak of faded denim and tangled hair. The men at the table barely had time to register the intrusion. Hajuan had the cup an inch from his lips when the small girl collided with the edge of the mahogany table. With a desperate, instinctive cry, Haina's hand flew out, her palm striking the base of the cup with a sharp crack. The porcelain flew from Hajuan's hand, spinning through the air like a broken bird before shattering against the marble floor. The tea splattered across the boss's polished leather shoes and the hem of the traitorous lieutenant's trousers. The silence that followed was deafening. It was a vacuum that sucked the oxygen out of the room. The 4 lieutenants scrambled to their feet, their hands reflexively reaching for the holsters hidden beneath their jackets. "Security!" one roared, his face contorting in a mixture of shock and suppressed rage. Hajuan remained seated. He didn't flinch. He slowly looked down at the shards of the shattered cup, then turned his intense, obsidian gaze toward the trembling child standing before him. Haina's chest heaved. Her small hands balled into fists at her sides, her eyes locked onto his. She didn't look away. "Haina!" Bowman appeared in the doorway, her face ghostly pale, her hands clutching a plastic bag of leftovers that now seemed like a death warrant. She dropped the bag, the food spilling unheeded across the floor as she threw herself toward her daughter, pulling the girl into her arms and dropping to her knees. "Please." Bowman's voice was a jagged sob. "Please, sir, she's just a child. She's hungry, she didn't know. I'll take her, we'll leave, we'll never come back." "The tea," Haina whispered, her voice small but piercing through her mother's frantic apologies. Hajuan tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. "What did you say, little one?" "Don't drink the tea," Haina said, pointing a shaking finger at the steaming puddle on the floor. She looked directly at the lieutenant who had been smiling the widest. The man with the blue tie said it would make you stop breathing. The room shifted. The air, already cold, turned glacial. The lieutenants froze, their eyes darting toward one another. The mask of loyalty beginning to fracture. Hajuan's gaze moved from Haina to the puddle on the floor, where the liquid was beginning to hiss faintly against the stone. a chemical reaction no ordinary tea should possess. He looked back at the mother and daughter huddled on the floor, the invisible cleaners who had just seen through a multi-million-won conspiracy. He didn't call for the guards to remove them. Instead, he leaned forward, his shadow falling over them like a dark cloak. "It seems," Hajuan said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated in the floorboards, "that I owe your daughter more than just the leftovers she was looking for." The sirens of the responding security teams were a distant wail compared to the pounding of Bowman's heart as she was ushered into the back of a black sedan. She held Haina so tightly the girl could feel the frantic rhythm of her mother's pulse. They weren't being arrested, but they weren't free either. Hajuan sat in the front seat, his silhouette a motionless wall of shadow against the passing neon lights of the Gangnam district. He hadn't spoken since they left the casino, but the air in the car was charged with the electricity of a predator deciding whether to strike or protect. When the car finally hummed to a stop, it wasn't at a police station or the dark alley Bowman had feared. They were in the bowels of a glass and steel monolith that pierced the Seoul skyline. The elevator ride was silent, a vertical journey that felt like ascending to the heavens after living a lifetime in the basement. The penthouse doors slid open to reveal a world of cold marble and floor-to-ceiling glass. The city stretched out below them like a carpet of fallen stars, indifferent to the life-or-death drama unfolding in the clouds. Hajuan walked to a sleek, minimalist bar and poured a glass of water, his movements precise and devoid of the tremor that still plagued Bowman's limbs. "Sit," he commanded. It wasn't an invitation. It was a directive. Bowman sank into a velvet sofa that felt too soft, too expensive for someone whose clothes still smelled of industrial bleach and kitchen grease. Haina remained standing, her small frame dwarfed by the massive windows, looking back at the man who held their lives in his hands. Hajuan walked toward them, but he didn't stop at the sofa. He knelt on one knee in front of Haina, bringing his eyes level with hers. The Mafia boss the world feared, the man who moved fortunes with a whisper, was now a student of a 7-year-old girl's gaze. "You said the man with the blue tie told me I would stop breathing," Hajuan said, his voice dropping to a low melodic hum. But that man was standing 10 meters away. He was whispering. There was music playing. Even his own bodyguard didn't hear him. Bowman moved to speak, to offer an excuse about a child's imagination, but Hajuan raised a single finger, silencing her without looking away from the girl. "How did you know, Haina?" Haina didn't flinch. She reached out, her small fingers instinctively twisting the hem of her faded shirt. "I didn't hear him with my ears," she said softly. "I saw his mouth. It's like a song I already know the words to. When people think they are being quiet, their faces are still very loud. They were happy you were going to sleep. Their eyes were tight." Hajuan leaned back slightly, a flicker of genuine shock crossing his intense features. It lasted only a second before the cold mask returned, but for that moment, he looked vulnerable. "You read lips," he murmured more to himself than to her. "And you read the truth behind them. She's always been different," Bowman whispered, her voice cracking. "She sees things before they happen. Please, Mr. Hajuan. We don't want any part of your world. We just wanted to eat." Hajuan stood up, turning his back to them to look out over his empire. "My world has already found you, Bowman. Those men who tried to kill me tonight? They don't leave witnesses. Especially not witnesses who can read the secrets they haven't even spoken yet." He turned back, his eyes landing on Bowman with a strange, sudden weight. "You think you're here for an interrogation? You're not. You're here because this is the only square mile in Seoul where I can guarantee you'll see tomorrow morning." He walked to a heavy oak desk and pulled a small, weathered leather wallet from a drawer. He flipped it open, revealing an old photograph of a man in a tactical uniform. Bowman's breath hitched in her throat. The room seemed to tilt. "Do you know why I didn't let my guards throw you out the moment you stepped into that lounge?" Hajuan asked. "Because when you ran through that door I saw a ghost. You have your father's eyes, Haina. And your father was the only man I ever trusted with my life." Bowman stood up, her knees shaking. "My husband. He was a construction worker. He died in an accident." Hajuan's smile was a grim, hollow thing. Is that what they told you? Your husband wasn't a laborer. He was my shadow. And if he were alive today, he wouldn't want his daughter begging for scraps in a kitchen. He would want her to finish what he started. The interrogation was over, but the danger was just beginning. As a heavy rain began to lash against the penthouse glass, Bowman realized they hadn't escaped the lion's den. They had been invited inside it, and the lion was looking for revenge. The rain hammered against the reinforced glass of the penthouse, the rhythmic thrumming the only sound in the vast, silent space. Bowman stood frozen, her eyes fixed on the photograph Hajuan held. It was her husband Minho, the man who had supposedly died in a tragic construction accident 3 years ago. But in this image, he wasn't wearing a hard hat or a fluorescent vest. He wore a sharp, tactical suit and a cold, focused expression she had never seen during their years of marriage. Hajuan traced the edge of the photograph with a thumb, his gaze distant. Minho wasn't just a man on my payroll, he said, his voice dropping into a register of profound respect. In our world, loyalty is a currency that most people counterfeit. But your husband was the gold standard. He was my strategist, the man who saw the moves on the board 3 steps before the enemy even sat down. We called him the Shadow because he could vanish into any room, any crowd, and come back with the truth. Bowman shook her head, her hands flying to her mouth. No, that's impossible. He was a simple man. He came home with dust on his boots and stories about the bridge they were building. He loved his garden. He loved his daughter. He did love you, Hajuan countered, his eyes snapping back to hers with an intensity that demanded she listen. That was his greatest strength and his ultimate vulnerability. Every lie he told you was a brick in a wall he built to keep this world away from your door. He didn't die because a crane failed, Bowman. He died because he discovered that the Soul Dragon Tongue had successfully infiltrated my inner circle. He was on his way to deliver a drive containing the identities of every double agent in the city when his car was forced off the bridge. Haina moved closer to the desk, her small hand reaching out to touch the photo. Daddy was a hero, she whispered, her lip-reading eyes scanning Hajuan's face for any sign of a lie. She found none, only a deep simmering grief that matched her mother's. He was the best of us, Hajuan said. He turned to the desk and tapped a sequence into a hidden keypad. A concealed drawer slid open, revealing a small, encrypted data drive and a worn leather journal. He knew they were coming for him. He left this for me, but he coded it so specifically that I've spent 3 years trying to unlock the final layer. He always said that if anything happened to him, the key would be in his greatest legacy. Hajuan looked at Haina, a realization dawning in his dark eyes. I thought he meant a bank account or a hidden property, but standing here watching you at that table, I realize he meant you. He knew you had his gift, Haina. He knew you could see the things others miss. Bowman felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The construction accident had been a targeted assassination. The poverty they had endured, the nights spent sharing a single bowl of rice, the desperate begging for leftovers. It was all the fallout of a war she hadn't known was being fought. The men who poisoned my tea tonight, Hajuan continued, his voice hardening into the tone of a man preparing for battle. They are the same ones who took Minho from you. They realize that if I'm gone, the secrets your husband died to protect will stay buried forever. And now that Haina has shown her hand, they know she is the only person left who can decode her father's final message. Bowman pulled Haina into the crook of her arm, her maternal instinct screaming at her to run, to hide, to disappear back into the slums where they were nobody. But she looked at the penthouse door, then at the city below, and finally at Hajuan. There was no going back. The invisible life she had cultivated was gone, shattered like the porcelain cup on the casino floor. What happens now? Bowman asked, her voice finally finding its strength. Hajuan tucked the photo back into his pocket and looked toward the elevator as a red light began to pulse on his security monitor. The traders were moving faster than he had anticipated. Now, he said, drawing a sleek, silenced weapon from beneath the desk with practiced ease, we stop running. I am going to finish what your husband started, but I need his daughter to help me see the truth. The pulsing red light on the security monitor cast a rhythmic, bloody hue across the cold marble of the penthouse. Ha-Juan didn't panic. His movements became fluid and frighteningly efficient. He didn't look like a man under siege. He looked like a predator finally finding his purpose. "Bowman, get the girl," he commanded, his voice a low vibration that brooked no argument. "The elevator is already compromised. They're coming up the service shafts." On the monitor, 4 men dressed in the tactical gear of the Seoul Metropolitan Police stepped into the hallway. They moved with the synchronized precision of elite soldiers, their faces obscured by matte black visors. In their hands they carried silenced submachine guns. To anyone else, they were law enforcement responding to a silent alarm. To Ha-Juan, they were ghosts sent to finish what had started at the casino. "Police," Bowman whispered, her voice trembling as she scooped Haina into her arms. "Why are the police?" "They aren't police," Ha-Juan interrupted, grabbing a heavy duffel bag from beneath the desk and tossing it to her. "They're the Dragon Tongs cleanup crew in borrowed skins. Move. Now." He led them toward a mirrored wall at the back of the library. With a sharp tug on a hidden latch, a section of the floor-to-ceiling glass slid back to reveal a cramped industrial service lift. It was the kind of exit built for emergencies that involve fire or blood. Just as they stepped inside the narrow metal cage, the front doors of the penthouse exploded inward with a deafening thud. The concussive blast blew the glass from the internal partitions, sending a rain of diamonds across the velvet sofas. The high-pitched whine of a flashbang echoed through the suite, a sensory assault meant to paralyze. Ha-Juan slammed the service lift shut and jammed a metal rod into the manual override. Through the small, wire-reinforced window of the lift, Bowman saw the officers flood the room. They didn't shout for a surrender. They opened fire on the empty furniture, the silenced rounds making a sound like heavy raindrops hitting a tin roof. "Close your eyes, Haina." Bowman squeezed her daughter's head against her shoulder, shielding her from the sight of their home for the last hour being shredded by lead. The lift lurched downward, a stomach-turning drop that felt like falling into an abyss. The metal groaned under the weight of the sudden descent. Ha-Juan stood with his back to them, his eyes fixed on the floor indicator as it skipped numbers. "They'll be waiting at the bottom," Ha-Juan said, checking the magazine of his sidearm. "They know the layout. They have the perimeter cordoned off. We have to exit through the subterranean cooling tunnels." "How are we supposed to get past them?" Bowman asked, her maternal fear finally hardening into a desperate, jagged edge. "I'm just a cleaner. My daughter is 7. We can't fight soldiers." Ha-Juan turned, and for a fleeting second, the coldness in his eyes softened as he looked at Haina. "You don't have to fight. You just have to survive." "Haina, look at me." The little girl peeked out from her mother's embrace. Her eyes were wide, but they weren't leaking tears. She was watching Ha-Juan's face, reading the tension in his jaw and the way his pupils dilated. "I need your gift, little one," Ha-Juan whispered. "The tunnels have echoes. I need you to tell me where they are before we see them. Can you do that for your father?" Haina nodded, a slow, solemn movement. She reached out and grabbed Ha-Juan's sleeve, her small fingers anchoring her to the only shield they had left. The lift hit the basement level with a bone-jarring rattle. As the doors hissed open, the smell of damp concrete and old oil rushed in to meet them. The tunnel stretched out like the throat of a giant, dark and dripping with condensation. Ha-Juan stepped out first, his weapon raised, scanning the shadows. Behind them, the sounds of the penthouse being systematically searched echoed down the shaft. The hunters were coming. This wasn't just a betrayal anymore. It was an extermination. "Left," Haina whispered suddenly, her voice barely a breath. 2 men. They are breathing fast. One of them is saying, "Sector 4 is clear." Ha-Juan didn't hesitate. He pivoted to the left, his weapon coughing twice. 2 shadows slumped into the dark water of the drainage trench. "Run," Ha-Juan breathed, grabbing Bowman's hand and pulling them into the labyrinth of the city's underbelly. The night of long knives had begun, and the only way out was through the heart of the monster. The cold, damp air of the maintenance tunnels clung to Bowman's skin like a second layer of fear. They moved through the darkness, the only light coming from the dim, amber glow of emergency lanterns spaced hundreds of meters apart. Above them, the city of Seoul hummed with an indifferent energy, millions of people sleeping or working, unaware that a war for the city's soul was being fought beneath their feet. Hajuan moved with a predatory grace, his shoes splashing rhythmically in the shallow, oily water of the drainage trench. He held Bowman's hand with a grip that was firm but not crushing, a silent anchor in the dark. Haina was perched on Hajuan's other shoulder, her small face pressed against the side of his head. Her eyes were closed, not out of terror, but because she was diverting every ounce of her sensory focus into her ears and the strange, intuitive map in her mind. "They are above us," Haina whispered, her voice vibrating against Hajuan's collarbone. "3 cars. They are moving slow, like they are looking for a lost dog." Hajuan stopped instantly, pulling Bowman into the shadow of a massive concrete pillar. He looked up at the ceiling, where the faint vibration of tires on asphalt filtered down through the ventilation grates. "Can you hear what they're saying, Haina?" Hajuan asked softly. The girl tilted her head, her brow furrowing in concentration. She wasn't just hearing voices. She was picking up the muffled, crackling bursts of radio static bleeding through the car floors. "The man in the first car is angry. He says the rats didn't come out the front. He's telling the others to check the subway entrance at Gwangwaman. If they reach the river, we lose the scent." Hajuan's jaw tightened. "They're ahead of us. They've anticipated the primary extraction points." He looked at Bowman, whose eyes were wide with a mixture of exhaustion and dawning realization. "We can't go to the subway," he said. "The Dragon Tong has eyes on the public cameras. We have to use the old tributary lines, the ones that aren't on the modern maps." "The ones my husband used?" Bowman asked, her voice a fragile thread in the dark. Hajuan nodded. "Minho mapped these tunnels for years. He called them the veins of the ghost. He knew that in a city this crowded, the only way to truly disappear is to go where the city has forgotten it even exists." They turned into a narrower corridor, the walls slick with black moss and the remains of old posters from a soul that no longer existed. The air grew thinner, smelling of rusted iron and ancient dust. As they climbed a rusted ladder toward a heavy iron manhole, Haina suddenly gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Wait," she hissed. Hajuan froze, his hand hovering over the rungs. "There is a man standing right on top of the circle," Haina whispered, her eyes snapping open. "He isn't talking. He's just breathing. He has a metal stick. He's waiting for the lid to move." Hajuan pulled back, his face hardening. A silent sentry. The Dragon Tong wasn't just searching. They were hunting with the patience of spiders. "Is there another way?" Bowman whispered, clutching the duffel bag Hajuan had given her. "There's a service pipe 200 meters back," Hajuan said, his mind clearly racing through the blueprints Minho had drilled into him years ago. "It leads to an old basement under a tea house. But it's a tight squeeze." They doubled back, their movements more frantic now as the sound of heavy boots began to echo from the main tunnel behind them. The hunters had found the entrance. They reached a circular pipe barely wide enough for an adult to crawl through. Hajuan helped Bowman in first, then passed Haina to her. He followed behind, his large frame scraping against the cold metal. The darkness here was absolute, a suffocating weight that pressed against their lungs. "They're in the tunnel now." Haina's muffled voice came from ahead of him in the pipe. "I can hear their boots. One of them is saying, 'Check the side pipes. Leave no stone unturned.'" The fear in the pipe was palpable, the sound of Bowman's shallow, terrified breathing echoing off the iron walls. But beneath the fear, something else was stirring in Bowman, a flicker of her husband's steel. She reached back and squeezed Hajuan's hand. "We're going to make it," she whispered, as much to herself as to him. Minho wouldn't have left these paths if they led to a dead end. Hajuan didn't answer, but his grip tightened in return. They crawled toward a tiny pinprick of light in the distance, a small beacon in the underbelly of a city that wanted them dead. They were no longer just a mafia boss and a cleaning woman. They were the last remnants of a secret Minho had died to keep, and the city was closing in. The pinprick of light at the end of the service pipe expanded until it became the dusty, slatted glow of a floor vent. With a grunt of effort, Hajuan heaved the heavy metal grate upward, allowing Bowman and Haina to scramble out into the cool, silent air of a basement. Above them, the floorboards creaked with the weight of history. As Bowman wiped the soot from her face, she looked around the room and felt a disorienting sense of déjà vu. They were in the cellar of an old building in the Insadong district, a neighborhood known for its traditional tea houses and antique shops. She recognized the smell, sandalwood, old paper, and the metallic tang of machine oil. "I know this place," Bowman whispered, her voice trembling. "Minho. He used to come here every Sunday. He told me he was restoring old clocks. He called it his hobby shop." Hajuan climbed out of the shaft, his dark suit ruined, but his gaze sharp and alert. "It wasn't a hobby, Bowman. It was an armory. And a sanctuary." They ascended a narrow wooden staircase that led into the main shop. It was exactly as Bowman remembered. Shelves lined with intricate brass gears, dismembered grandfather clocks, and delicate watchmaker tools. To any passerby, it was the workshop of a craftsman obsessed with time. But Hajuan didn't look at the clocks. He walked directly to a wall-mounted cabinet filled with antique Korean calligraphy brushes. "Your husband knew that if the dragon tongue ever moved against me, my own strongholds would be the first to fall," Hajuan explained, his fingers tracing a specific pattern on the cabinet's wood grain. "He built this place under a shell company. Not even my highest lieutenants knew it existed." Hajuan pressed a hidden catch, and the entire wall of brushes swung inward with a heavy hydraulic hiss. Behind it lay a room that looked like a high-tech nerve center. Monitors flickered to life as they entered, casting a cool blue light over racks of specialized equipment, and a heavy steel safe bolted to the center of the floor. Haina walked toward the safe, her eyes reflecting the scrolling lines of green code on the nearby screens. She wasn't afraid anymore. The familiar scent of her father's workspace seemed to wrap around her like a protective blanket. "Daddy's secrets are in here," she said, placing her small hand on the cold steel of the safe. "The Enforcer's safe box," Hajuan murmured. "Minho told me once that the combination wasn't a number. It was a story." Bowman walked to the workbench, where a half-finished clock sat under a magnifying lamp. Beside it lay a small hand-drawn sketch of a 3-year-old Haina, her wide eyes captured in messy graphite. Tears blurred Bowman's vision as she realized that while Minho was playing a deadly game of shadows, his heart had never left their small, cramped apartment. He wasn't just hiding from the world, Bowman realized, touching the sketch. He was building a bridge back to us. Everything here. It's all for us. Hajuan knelt by the safe, his expression solemn. "He didn't trust me with the final key, Bowman. He knew that if I had it, I might use it too soon and start a war I couldn't win. He left it for the two of you." He looked at the safe's interface. It wasn't a standard dial. It was a voice and pattern recognition system. A small speaker sat above a touch-sensitive screen. "Haina," Hajuan said, stepping back to give the girl space. "He said the safe would only open for the person who knew his favorite lullaby, the one he sang in the language he never spoke out loud." Bowman's heart skipped a beat. She remembered nights when Minho would rock Haina to sleep, humming a melody in a dialect so old and obscure it sounded like the wind through ancient pines. He had told her it was a secret language from the mountains where his grandfather was born. Haina stepped forward, her face illuminated by the safe's red standby light. She took a deep breath, her small shoulders squaring. She didn't need to read lips now. She only had to remember. In a voice that was clear and hauntingly steady, she began to sing the soft, rhythmic verses of a dialect that shouldn't have existed in a modern city like Seoul. As the final note left her lips, the red light turned a brilliant, steady emerald. The heavy bolts inside the door groaned and retracted. The safe didn't just contain money or weapons. It held a black box, the dead man's switch that Scott, her father, had spent his life preparing. "We have it," Hajuan whispered, his voice thick with an emotion Bowman hadn't thought he was capable of feeling. the evidence to dismantle the dragon tong for good. But as the safe door swung open, the shop's external security monitors flared to life. Outside, the quiet street of Insadong was suddenly filled with the harsh glare of high-beam headlights. The hunters had followed the scent of the ghost, and they were no longer pretending to be police. They were coming with everything they had. The safe sat open, its heavy door a shield against the blue light of the monitors. Inside lay not gold, but a single vintage reel-to-reel tape recorder and 5 small, hand-carved wooden tablets. Each tablet was inscribed with a different script, none of them modern. Hajuan stared at them, his brilliant strategic mind finally meeting a wall he couldn't climb. "I've seen these symbols in the files he left," Hajuan whispered, the sound of heavy tires screeching on the pavement outside vibrating through the floor. "But they don't follow any known encryption. It's not a code, it's a sequence. A ghost's map." Bowman felt the air in the room grow heavy. Outside, the first of the Dragon Tong's vehicles had breached the perimeter, their spotlights sweeping across the shop's storefront. "He used to tell Haina bedtime stories," Bowman said, her voice trembling as she looked at the tablets. "Stories about 5 brothers from 5 different mountains who spoke to the wind in different tongues. I thought it was just folklore." Haina stepped forward, her small fingers tracing the carvings on the first tablet. She didn't look at the monitors showing the gunmen dismounting from their SUVs. She was back in her father's lap, smelling the sandalwood and grease of this very shop. "It's not just stories, Mommy," Haina said softly. She picked up the first tablet, her eyes darting across the wood. "This is Jejueo, the old island speech," she murmured, her voice taking on a rhythmic, melodic quality. "It says, the roots start where the sea meets the basalt." She moved to the second, her gaze sharpening. "This is Yukchin from the far north. The wind blows the smoke toward the iron gate." Hajuan leaned in, his hand resting on the grip of his weapon, but his focus entirely on the 7-year-old. "The iron gate. The old shipyard in Incheon?" Haina didn't answer. She was already on the 3rd and 4th tablets, her gift working at a feverish pace. She began to speak in a rapid-fire blur of dialects, the guttural tones of the Gyeongsang Mountains mixing with the flowing, archaic court language of the Joseon era. To Bowman it was a beautiful, terrifying noise. To Haina it was a puzzle clicking into place. "The patterns," Haina whispered, her eyes wide as she looked at the final tablet. "He didn't write a location. He wrote a frequency." She turned to the high-tech console, her small fingers dancing across the keyboard with an instinct that defied her age. She began to input the data derived from the 5 dialects, the linguistic coordinates her father had hidden in plain sight. He used the tonal shifts of the dialects as the encryption keys, Hajuan realized, a look of grim admiration crossing his face. "Minho, you magnificent bastard. You hid the world's most dangerous ledger in a nursery rhyme." On the main screen a map of Seoul appeared, but it wasn't a street map. It was a digital overlay of the city's private servers and dark fiber networks. A single red pulse began to throb over an unsuspecting warehouse near the Han River. "The dead man's switch," Hajuan said. "It's not just a file. It's a live server. If we reach it and input the final pattern, every transaction, every bribe, and every murder order the Dragon Tong has ever sent will be broadcast to the Blue House and the FBI simultaneously." A sudden violent boom rocked the building. The front windows of the hobby shop shattered as a flashbang detonated, followed by the heavy rhythmic thud of a battering ram hitting the reinforced shop door. The security monitors turned into a blizzard of static as the hunters began to cut the power. "They're inside," Bowman gasped, clutching Haina to her chest. Hajuan grabbed the data drive and the 5 tablets, shoving them into the duffel bag. He looked at the red pulse on the screen. The warehouse was miles away, and the street was crawling with assassins. "The final pattern isn't on the tablets, is it, Haina?" Hajuan asked, looking into the girl's eyes. Haina shook her head, her hand touching her heart. "Daddy said the last part of the song is only for me to sing. Into the machine at the river." Hajuan nodded, his expression hardening into a mask of lethal intent. He kicked over a heavy workbench to create a barricade and checked his ammunition one last time. Then we have a warehouse to reach. Bowman, stay low. Haina, keep your ears open. The ghost is leading us home, but we have to fight our way through the graveyard first. As the door to the basement began to groan under the weight of the intruders, Hajuan led them toward a second, even smaller tunnel hidden behind a rack of grandfather clocks. The final pattern was set. Now they just had to survive the song. The roar of the city felt distant as the black SUV skidded to a halt in front of the rusted corrugated gates of the Han River warehouse. The industrial district was a ghost town of shadows and salt air, but the silence was an illusion. Hajuan didn't wait for the engine to die. He was out of the door, his weapon scanning the perimeter as he ushered Bowman and Haina toward the side entrance. Inside, the warehouse was a cavern of steel and shadow, dominated by a central glass-walled server room that hummed with a low electric thrum. This was the heart of Minho's dead man switch. There, Hajuan pointed to a sleek, black console sitting amidst a nest of glowing fiber-optic cables. Haina, the pattern. Now. Bowman's hand shook as she set the 5 wooden tablets on the desk. Outside, the sound of multiple engines began to converge on their location. The Dragon Tong had abandoned stealth for speed. High-beam lights cut through the grime-streaked windows, sweeping across the rafters like searchlights in a prison camp. Haina didn't look at the window. She climbed onto the operator's chair, her feet dangling, and looked at the prompt on the screen. It was a blank audio visualizer, waiting for a specific frequency. I have to sing the whole song, Mommy, Haina whispered, her voice small against the growing cacophony of sirens and screeching tires outside. If I stop, the data will break. I won't let them get close to you, Hajuan promised. He moved toward the heavy steel doors of the warehouse, dragging a heavy equipment crate to reinforce the latch. He turned back once, his eyes meeting Bowman's. For the first time, the coldness of the Mafia boss was gone, replaced by the grim resolve of a man honoring a brother's memory. Keep her focused. No matter what you hear, do not let her stop. As the first sledgehammer blow struck the warehouse doors, Haina closed her eyes. She began to sing. The melody was haunting, a bridge of ancient dialects that seemed to resonate with the very machinery of the room. On the monitors, progress bars appeared, flickering as the ghost ledger began to upload to every major news outlet and federal server in the country. 5%, 12%. The doors groaned. A window high above shattered, and a canister of tear gas skittered across the concrete floor. Hajuan didn't flinch. He donned a tactical mask and opened fire through the gap in the door, his suppressed weapon coughing in steady rhythmic bursts. Keep singing, Haina, Bowman cried, tearing a strip of her shirt to cover her daughter's nose and mouth against the stinging smoke. The warehouse became a chaotic symphony of violence and music. The sharp crack of return fire from the Dragon Tong assassins echoed through the rafters, punctuated by the high melodic trills of Haina's song. Bullets sparked against the glass of the server room, spiderwebbing the reinforced panels but failing to pierce them. 45%, 60%. They're coming through the roof. Hajuan shouted over the din. 2 silhouettes descended on rappelling ropes, crashing through the skylights. Hajuan pivoted, taking down the first in midair. But the second landed hard and rolled behind a stack of shipping pallets, pinning Hajuan down with a barrage of automatic fire. Bowman saw a shadow move near the back of the server room. One of the traders had bypassed the main doors. He was a lean man with a jagged scar across his brow, the very lieutenant who had smiled while the tea was being served. He raised a silenced pistol, aiming it directly at the small girl who was the only key to their destruction. Bowman didn't think. She didn't feel the maternal fear that had kept her bowed in kitchens for years. She felt Minho's steel. She grabbed a heavy brass clockweight from the duffel bag and lunged, throwing her entire weight against the glass door to block his line of sight. Sing, Haina. Sing, she screamed. The lieutenant fired. The glass shattered into 1,000 diamonds, but the trajectory was thrown off as Bowman collided with him, swinging the heavy weight with a primal roar. They went down in a tangle of limbs and desperate gasps. 88%, 95%. Haina's voice never wavered, though tears tracked through the soot on her cheeks. She reached the final soaring verse, the one her father had told her was the key to the mountain. As she hit the final note, the monitors flashed a brilliant, blinding white. A single word appeared in bold, crimson letters: transmission complete. At that exact moment, the warehouse doors were blown off their hinges. But it wasn't the dragon tongue. A flood of tactical lights and the roar of federal police filled the space. The data dump had reached the authorities instantly, triggering a pre-programmed emergency response to the server's GPS coordinates. Hajuan stood up from behind his cover, lowering his weapon as the traders dropped theirs, realizing the world now knew every secret they owned. He walked through the smoke to where Bowman sat on the floor, breathless and bruised, clutching a sobbing hyena to her chest. The siege was over. The switch had been flipped. And for the first time in 3 years, the ghosts were finally silent. The dawn over the Han River was not the harsh, neon glare of the night before, but a soft, cleansing gold that reflected off the gentle ripples of the water. Outside the warehouse, the chaotic swarm of tactical teams and forensic units had settled into a rhythmic, professional hum. The high-ranking lieutenants of the Dragon Tong, along with the moles in the police department, were being led away in zip ties, their faces pale as they realized that every encrypted whisper they had ever uttered was now part of a federal indictment. Hajuan stood by the open back doors of the warehouse, his silhouette framed by the rising sun. He looked tired, the sharp lines of his suit torn and stained with the soot of the battle, but the weight that had pulled at his shoulders for 3 years seemed to have vanished. He was no longer a man looking for a ghost. He was a man who had finally brought him home. Inside the server room, the air was cooling as the fans slowed. Bowman sat on a plush equipment crate, her arms wrapped tightly around Hyena, who had finally fallen into a deep, exhausted sleep against her mother's chest. For the first time in Bowman's memory, her daughter's eyes weren't searching the room for hidden threats or reading the lips of dangerous men. She was just a child breathing in the quiet. Hajuan walked over, his footsteps soft on the concrete. He didn't tower over them this time. He sat on a low bench opposite Bowman, watching the sleeping girl. "The data has already reached the Blue House," Hajuan said, his voice a low, respectful murmur. "By noon, the Dragon Tong will cease to exist as a functional organization. And because the transmission was triggered from a secure, independent site your husband built, the government is classifying this as a high-level intelligence operation. You and Hyena are no longer witnesses to a crime. You are the family of a national hero." Bowman looked down at her hands. They were stained with grease and bruised from the fight, but they didn't tremble. "Hero is a heavy word, Mr. Hajuan. I just want her to be safe. I want her to grow up without looking behind her." Hajuan reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. He didn't hand it to her. He placed it on the console beside the wooden tablets. Minho didn't just leave behind secrets and codes. He left a legacy that was legally tied to his identity as a security consultant. This is the deed to a home in a quiet district near the mountains, and the documents for an educational trust that will ensure Hyena never has to use her gift for anything other than her own dreams. Bowman looked at the envelope, then back at Hajuan. "And what about you? You're still who you are." Hajuan stood up, looking out at the river. "I am the man who owes his life to your daughter and his soul to your husband. I will be the shadow that watches the house in the mountains, but I will never step inside it. You've had enough of my world, Bowman." He paused, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips. "There is a car waiting outside to take you to a hotel. A real one with a kitchen that stays open all night. And from this moment on, you don't ask for leftovers. You order whatever you want." Bowman stood up, carefully hoisting the sleeping Hyena into her arms. She felt the weight of her daughter, but it no longer felt like a burden she had to carry alone. As she walked toward the exit, she passed the small plastic bag of Wagyu scraps she had dropped in the casino kitchen a lifetime ago. It looked small and insignificant now. As they stepped out into the morning air, the scent of the river was fresh and full of promise. Hyena stirred in her sleep, her small hand reaching out to grab Bowman's collar. She didn't wake up, but a small peaceful smile played on her lips. They were no longer the invisible ones, the beggars at the feast, or the cleaners of other people's messes. Bowman climbed into the back of the waiting car, looking back one last time at the warehouse. Hajuan was gone, vanished back into the shadows he ruled, but the sun was still rising. She leaned her head back against the leather seat and closed her eyes, listening to the steady rhythmic breathing of her daughter. The song was over, the debt was paid, and for the first time in her life, the future didn't look like a dark alley, it looked like home. If this story made you feel something, please like the video and subscribe to this channel for more.